A group of prominent legal academics has written a letter to the New South Wales Attorney-General calling for the early release of Kathleen Folbigg. Last month, new scientific evidence was accepted at a judicial inquiry as grounds for reasonable doubt over Folbigg's conviction for the murder of her 4 children between 1989 and 1999. But she remains in prison pending a final report from Commissioner Tom Bathurst. The experts who wrote the letter to Minister Michael Daly say every additional day Kathleen Folbigg remains in jail constitutes, quote, an unconscionable deprivation of her liberty. Meera Sandrock is an Associate Professor in the Faculty of Law and Justice at the University of New South Wales and one of the co-authors of that letter. Meera Sandrock, welcome to 7:30.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Now, who are the signatories of this letter to the New South Wales Attorney-General and what are you asking for?
So the signatories are senior academics across the fields of criminal law, evidence law and criminology from a range of universities in New South Wales and in Melbourne. And we are essentially, I guess, asking for the immediate release of Kathleen Folbigg, pending any final resolution of her matter, so pending the handing down of the final report by Commissioner Bathurst, and then any other proceedings that might sort of flow from that, either a pardon or a quashing of her conviction.
And why is it appropriate for her to be released ahead of that final report being delivered?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question because obviously, yes, to some extent proceedings are still ongoing and all of us have been watching the case for a very long time and have, I think, held back from commenting during the hearings because we felt that it was appropriate for the hearings to unfold in their own sort of space. But it was very clear from the closing submissions from the counsel assisting and in particular from the Director of Public Prosecutions that it was now very much open to the inquirer, Commissioner Bathurst, to make a finding that there was now reasonable doubt in relation to the convictions, Kathleen Folbigg's convictions. And so given that, and given that sort of consistency across those submissions, that it's appropriate, we feel, to both signal that we very much endorse that conclusion, but also that it's appropriate that she be released now, given how clear those signals are, that even the DPP concedes that there is now reasonable doubt in relation to her convictions.
And is there any precedent in Australia for releasing someone ahead of the final report?
Yeah. Or ahead of sort of the resolution of proceedings. Yeah, so obviously the most probably prominent example or precedent for that would be Lindy Chamberlain. So in the case of Lindy Chamberlain, evidence was discovered, the matinee jacket, and she was released immediately upon the discovery of that evidence, but her actual proceedings, the final quashing of her convictions didn't really occur until several years later, but she was released immediately. So that's one of the kind of clearest precedents, I think, that it's possible to release someone even though there are still some other formal mechanisms to kind of work through. There's also a couple of other precedents. My understanding is that in the case of Roseanne Beckett in New South Wales, she was also released pending an inquiry and then pending the final. And
just to be clear for the audience, what kind of conditions is Kathleen Folbigg being held in right now?
So our understanding is that she's being held in sort of quite restrictive conditions, protective custody essentially, that there has been incidents where she's been assaulted in prison. And so to that extent, she's also at, her personal safety continues to be at risk.
Now, just to be clear, so in the course of the inquiry, which wrapped up recently, there was very significant evidence, both in terms of the way the children, her 4 children, died, the nature of those deaths, and also the powerful effect of her diaries. Just on the nature of deaths, what is it that we know now that enabled all of those people there to come to those conclusions and for you to support her release?
Yeah. So I think it's probably important to make clear that there was always the possibility of natural causes in relation to all 4 children. But I guess what has perhaps crystallised in the most recent inquiry is that now a very significant number of medical experts from across the world have indicated that they now see that there's a reasonable possibility that a specific genetic variant that wasn't known at the time of the trial could now be a reasonable possibility as a cause of death for 2 of the children, for Sarah and Laura. And so that has both strengthened the evidence in terms of an alternative or a natural causes, but it's also weakened the reasoning that there's an improbability of 4 children dying from natural causes, because we now have this very clear, reasonable possibility in relation to those 2.
And in relation to the diaries, obviously they've been a huge anchor all along in terms of the conviction. So what's changed in relation to them?
So yes, again, I think there's always been some criticism about the way that the prosecution and the courts relied on her diaries as effectively confessions or admissions to guilt. But again, what changed in this inquiry was that the inquiry heard from a range of experts who were able to contextualise those, the diaries, contextualise the way that she was speaking, to make it clear that these were within the range of kind of what one might call ordinary or normal reactions, given her circumstances, which were obviously extraordinary. And that in particular, that the submissions to the inquiry are that at best those diary entries can now be seen as neutral, like they've been rendered neutral. And so the significance of those diaries in sort of bolstering her conviction has really fallen away. And so that's important. And
so as we sit here, it is the view of you and your very senior legal expert colleagues that Kathleen Folbigg should be released.
Absolutely.
Mera Sanrock, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity.